Good morning, everyone, and welcome to EAB University, a webinar series funded by the USDA Forest Service. My name is Robin Usborne, and I'm coming to you from Michigan State University. Along with my EAB University colleagues, Amy Stone from The Ohio State University and Dr. Cliff Sadoff from Purdue University, we welcome you to today's presentation entitled EAB Preparedness in the Early Years in Colorado, presented by Boulder City Forester Kathleen Alexander and Denver City Forester Rob Davis. Kathleen Alexander has been working for the City of Boulder for the past 19 years. She received her BS degree in forest biology and a master's in forest management from Colorado State University. She was named the ISA Rocky Mountain Chapter Arborist of the Year in 2014 for her work with Dr. Ned Tisserat and Dr. Whitney Cranshaw from Colorado State University on the identification of both thousand cankers disease in walnut and the drippy blight disease of red oak. Rob Davis has a forestry management degree from Colorado State University and is an ISA certified arborist, a certified nursery professional through the Colorado Nursery and Greenhouse Association, and is the past president of the ISA Rocky Mountain Chapter. In 2010, Rob began working as the city forester for the city and county of Denver, where he manages an urban tree canopy with an asset value of $2.9 billion. That canopy provides $122 million in annual benefits. Denver's forestry program directly maintains 76,000 park trees, and there are 2.2 million trees citywide under his regulation. Denver's annual urban forestry budget is more than $6.7 million, with 39 dedicated full-time forestry staff members. Both Robin and Kathleen serve on the Emerging Pest of Colorado Committee and the Colorado EAB response team. Before we get started, please know that we welcome your comments and questions. Please feel free to write them in the question and answer feature, which you can find by mousing over the bottom or occasionally the top of your screen. We will make note of these questions and we'll have our presenters respond to them after the presentation has ended. To keep these free webinars coming, we need your feedback. There will be a link provided to you in the Q&A pod at the end of the webinar for a short, voluntary, confidential survey that we hope you'll take the time to fill out. If you're one of the first 10 people to fill out the survey, we will be sending you an EAB goodie bag. But we hope you'll give us feedback either way. I will also be sending out an email after the webinar with that link in case you weren't able to access it during the webinar. For those of you wanting CEUs, if you would like a certificate indicating that you participated in today's live webinar, complete the survey and send an email message to Amy Stone at stone.91@osu.edu. Certificates will be mailed to you within a week of today's program. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available for viewing soon at www.emeraldashborer.info. You will also find the recordings for all previous EAB University webinars there. Thank you for attending today. And Kathleen, please unmute your microphone and share your screen with your presentation, and we will get started.
Well, good morning. Thanks for having us. I wanted to just start with a very brief history of urban forestry in Colorado, just to sort of set the stage for our EAB preparedness. The Front Range of Colorado, way back when in the 1800s, was essentially treeless, as you can see by these historic photos on the top here. These photos were all taken in Boulder. The top ones were taken back in the 1870s, 1880s, and the bottom ones are more modern day shots of those same landscapes. We really have very few tree species native to Front Range of Colorado, maybe just a few cottonwoods, a few willows growing along the creeks. It's really all of the trees that we have our urban were planted by really the settlers that moved out here from the Midwest and the East, who brought the trees with them because they loved the trees. They didn't want to be out here without those trees that they loved. Unfortunately, however, it's not really easy being a tree in Colorado. We are definitely what you can call weather challenged here. We get those really late spring or early fall heavy wet snowstorms, that the real limb breakers. We also get windstorms here in Colorado. Boulder is known for its wind. 75 miles per hour is just sort of a tad bit breezy in Boulder. We're also known for our extreme temperature fluctuations. In the fall of 2014, it was relatively mild heading into November. And on November 10th, the temperature fell from a high of 63 down to a low of negative 11 in about 36 hours. So in addition to emerald ash borer now in Boulder, we're having to deal with over 350 dead standing Siberian elms, similar to what you're seeing up here in this photo, just as a result of that one temperature swing. Then, of course, the trees in Colorado, the Front Range, were heavily impacted by the 2002 droughts. And then from one extreme to the next, then we had the 2013 Boulder County flood events, the historic weather event there. We received about 18 inches of precipitation in a 24-hour period of time in an area that's used to receiving about 14 inches of annual precip. What this really means, though, is that it's hard to care for trees in Colorado. People really do have to take care of them, though, to get them established and to get them to grow. Generally speaking, that means that urban forestry groups in Colorado tend to be very well supported and well respected, which is good for us, but it's a little bit different for emerald ash borer now. You know, we've sort of taken it for granted that we just work with each other here. But what we've learned, though, over the past several years with emerald ash borer is that's really not the norm across the country, that's really more sort of the, that we're different, I suppose. So I just wanted to go through, take a couple minutes just to show you how we actually got to where we are with urban forestry. Back in the 1980s, a group of Denver Metro foresters hosted a series of annual meetings that they affectionately termed the NUTS, the National Urban Tree Symposiums. I think, you know, they probably could have called it the State Urban Tree Symposiums, but I think they were going for the joke there with the acronym. But anyway, the Colorado Tree Coalition, or the CTC, really grew out of this group. Now, the CTC is the parent organization over several chapters in the state. The Front Range Urban Forestry Council, or FRUFCA, is the largest and most active of those groups. FRUFCA oversees several different committees. The Insect and Disease is one of those. And the Insect and Disease Committee in 2009 spun off another group that Rob and I are both members of, that we affectionately termed EPIC, for emerging pests in Colorado. Now this group, the main goal of this, you know, it was started to assist with thousand cankers disease response, and we thought that we would sort of use it as a test case for what we would do when we found emerald ash borer. So the focus really was not specific to thousand cankers or emerald ash borer, but more broad on invasive insect and disease pests in general. You can see all of the agencies that participate in this working group. But one of the major goals was just to bring all of these agencies to the table and for us to really learn, you know, when we found emerald ash borer, what would the local governments be responsible for? What would the state governments do? What would be the federal role in this? Education and outreach was also very important. You know, we put out several flyers, brochures, information to primarily industry folks on educating them about some of these invasive pests. The State Department of Ag also developed a Colorado EAB response plan. You could see sort of the title page up here on the top. And what I find really sort of cool when you think about it, the date of this is actually August of 2013, which ironically is just the month before we found emerald ash borer in the city of Boulder. And then the EPIC work group also organizes invasive species workshops for the industry folks in Colorado. Now, when we detected emerald ash borer within the city, just like they do back in the Midwest, APHIS came in and they instituted the incident command system. This, over the past couple of years, has really sort of morphed into what we call the Colorado EAB response team. A lot of the same agencies that were involved in that original EPIC working group are also involved in the response team. The goals for this, because it's focused strictly on emerald ash borer, though, is just a little bit different. The goal of this group was really more the coordinated initial response to emerald ash borer, all of the PR, the messaging, the media. I know with us in the city of Boulder, they helped out tremendously because we were just overwhelmed with the media requests that we had received in just the first couple weeks after the official notification went out. They also managed the state website and the quarantines and then the ongoing detection efforts.
So I'm going to take over for a few minutes here and I want to touch on some of the unique challenges and some of the things that are a little different in Colorado looking at emerald ash borer. Kathleen kind of already hit on the historic change of taking Colorado from basically a desert prairie with the capital here and creating a beautiful urban forest and a much nicer place to live. So I'm going to run through just a handful of things that may be a little more unusual or unique with us managing this pest in Colorado. Kathleen touched on weather events, really common in Colorado for our ash to start leafing out late and that new tender tissue of those leaves getting zapped and having to start over. A little bit of a drain on energy reserves within our ash trees. We also have some native pests. Lilac ash borer is an insect that back in the 90s, you'd see it every once in a while in ash trees, but it seems like in the last couple of decades, it's gotten worse. A lot of young ash trees hit by this pest. They don't bore directly under the cambium, they get deeper into the tree, so it just kind of weakens the trees, typically not fatal. Ash bark beetle. This is an interesting one because, again, I've always known this bug to be more of a pest that attacks really stressed trees, going after dead small branches. In the last 3-4 years, it seems like it's gotten a lot worse. You can see the very tiny hole. That's actually on a large diameter, down low trunk on an ash tree, which is unusual, not something that seems like it's changing a little bit. So the reality of all this stuff is, to be technical, we have a lot of crappy looking ash trees all over the Front Range that look like these here down by Coors Field, trees that you would see and think, oh, here it is, I found it. I've had a lot of great colleagues and myself stop and look at trees over and over and just not have luck finding it. Things from premature discoloration, these trees up in a park in a small town north of Denver, about an hour. This is a spot where I was convinced I found emerald ash borer. Trees just rapidly declining, in a 2-year period, going from very healthy to, almost stone dead. Lots of ash bark beetle emerging from trunks on trees, unusual stuff, but just ash kind of going downhill really quickly. But the point being, it's just we've got a lot of these false leads on trees where we think we're going to find it somewhere else. Other considerations, just looking at Colorado ash, we have this question of will EAB knock our ash trees out more quickly with these other pressures being not really as conducive to growing trees here. How are they going to hold up once EAB starts to blow up in areas? With our ash trees growing more slowly, being a little bit more stressed, how will the wounding from trunk injections impact our ash trees? Will we get more decay? Will we get more cracks from the injection sites? And then the other 2 points to kind of finish up with in this little section here, I really wonder about how the EAB will spread with the way forests are kind of laid out here, and I want to talk just briefly about wind. So the point of the movement is we've got these islands of urban forests that are kind of scattered across the Front Range of the mountains here, where you wonder how will EAB jump from Boulder down into Westminster. We've got our beautiful this is our native forest here, the one cottonwood out in the middle of nowhere. But what will that do? How will that how will EAB move? Will it move more quickly because it's has to jump further distances to cities, or will it move more slowly? The reality of Denver to Boulder is we're about from the southeast edge of Boulder to the northwest edge of Denver. It's about 15 miles. That red line is a very major traffic route for most traffic coming out of Boulder, heading into the metro area. And we're just trying to understand how will this move in Colorado compared to these other areas in the country that have these native ash forests around them. And then the reality is it can be really windy here. We've had conditions where native borers from things like in Gamble Oak to Mount Pine Beetle, they've been blown out into the eastern parts of the state. And how will that influence how EAB could move out of Boulder? And just lastly, I want to talk a little bit about this Metro Denver Urban Forest Assessment. This was done in 2013. We did this with the U.S. Forest Service, UC Davis. The idea was, let's talk about how valuable our trees are. We decided to capture not just Denver, but we did this very metro-wide type of study because the trees benefit all of us here and they don't really care about our municipal borders. But the nice thing about this is it gave us numbers of trees in all these different communities, and we can do some estimates based on if there were 15% ash. We think 330,000 ash in Denver, 98,000 in Boulder, and all these other cities now can use this data to help talk to council and justify why not just cut them all down, get it over with type of mentality. The reality is these trees are worth a lot when you have an estimated 1.4 million ash trees in this greater metro area. They're providing $551 million in these annual benefits. So we're talking stormwater, property value, all those things. So that's just a quick little touch on Denver and some unique pieces of ash in Colorado. I'm going to pass back to Kathleen.
Okay, well, the City of Boulder EAB story. Just for a quick overview of the city in general, the City of Boulder really prides itself on its commitment to environmental integrity and stewardship. Generally speaking, for an urban forestry department, that's very positive. People love their trees in Boulder. They don't want to see them removed. And generally, they understand all of those great services that the urban tree canopy provides. It can be challenging, though. City of Boulder has a pesticide ban for city property. We only allow a few exceptions. Luckily for us, one of those exceptions is when the life of a significant tree is threatened. In Boulder, we're lucky in that our soils tend to be a little bit more acidic than elsewhere along the Front Range, so we're able to grow a wider diversity of tree species. So we have over 240 tree species in our tree inventory that was just updated last year. About 12%, or about 6,000 of those, are public green and white ash trees. Green ash actually is the only species that comprises more than 10% in our inventory. But as Rob was mentioning, from that Denver Metro Urban Forest Assessment, we know that we have over 70,000 ash on private property and then naturalized along all of our creeks. Now, just for some background about our program specifically, I had mentioned all of those abiotic issues earlier that our trees here have to deal with. Well, we also have an influx of native pests because of our proximity to the foothills. Ips beetle and spruce. We've had several years with outbreaks of mountain pine beetle in our urban pines. This year, we're expecting Douglas fir tussock moth to be a problem, just because last year it was quite the issue up in the foothills. But our forestry work group has sort of developed a reputation, I suppose you could say. Although I think in the foresters here in the state, it's almost sort of more of a joke that if something weird is going to show up, it's going to show up in Boulder first, or at least we're going to find it. And I often get asked why that is, why Boulder? I think there are actually some pretty valid reasons, why some of these things show up in Boulder. One is I think we're a pretty moderate risk for importation. I mean, we are a college town. A large percent of our properties in Boulder are rentals, approaching 50%. There's a lot of turnover in those. We also get, a high volume of tourist traffic coming through Boulder, in the spring, summer, and fall. I'm sure there's a lot of firewood moving up there, heading up to Estes Park, Rocky Mountain National Park. Our forestry division is also a tad bit old school in that we still do a citywide survey every summer where we drive all of the streets and alleys. It gives us an opportunity to sort of lay our eyes on all of our public trees at least once during the year. But it also allows us to see what's going on in the private tree population as well. We could see trends, not just sort of on a block scale, but also on a neighborhood and then a larger citywide scale. That's what happened back in 2002 when we had the drought. We saw walnuts dying. The following year in 2003, when we did the survey, we saw a lot more walnuts dying. So we had brought it to the attention of Drs. Whitney Cranshaw and Ned Tisserad up at CSU, who came down, dissected trees with us, and over the next several years, they were able to identify what was going on in those walnuts and named it thousand-cankers disease. Same thing in 2009 into 2010, we saw a lot of northern red oaks dying. We invited them down again, they did dissections, and were able to identify the bacteria impacting the red oaks. So really, our staff, I think, has just been doing the easy part there, just sort of throwing up the red flag when we see trees dying and we can't really figure out what's going on. We've been very fortunate to have the experts up at CSU who are willing to come down and help us figure out what's going on. Although I think they're probably going to start screening their phone calls. If they see that the city of Boulder's calling, they're not going to answer their phones anymore. But that brings us to, how did we find emerald ash borer? Well, in the fall of 2012, it was found in Kansas City, and the media said that it had been there most likely at least 5 years. So we really thought, well, if it's been in Kansas for 5 years, it's got to be in Colorado. It's probably in Boulder. We just have to figure out how to find it. So we did change our monitoring protocols to give us a better chance to find it. We said any dead or dying ash trees, rather than just putting them on general removal contracts, we would actually give them to our forestry IPM coordinator to go out and sample prior to removal. And coincidentally, the first tree, the first dead ash that she went out to sample, she found it. She looked closely, she saw D-shaped exit holes in the trunk, she started ripping the bark off, she saw the serpentine galleries, she saw dead adults that were stuck in the bark, called me on the telephone. That was not really the phone call you want to receive, but because I had already been working with all of the other agencies on the EPIC work group, I knew exactly who to call with APHIS. Actually had their cell phone numbers programmed into my phone. That was quite the phone conversation, but after some few choice curse words, I think there, they came out the next day and they were great. They helped us, they sampled nearby trees with us and found the other life stages that they were able to submit for positive confirmation. Now, the one thing we didn't know was how far it had spread. Was this pretty isolated within Boulder? Was it spread throughout the city already? So what we did was we used the branch sampling protocol developed by committee and Forestry. To do a delimitation survey for the EABs back to our shop where they were peeled. And what we found was during the delimitation survey, these grids highlighted in red is where emerald ash borer was detected. We were very careful, though, in our messaging to the public not to call those grids positive and the others negative. It was just this is where we've detected it, but that we were assuming it was in at least low-level populations in the rest of the city as well. Now, when I said we did this delimitation survey, we, as in the City of Boulder Forestry, never could have done this by ourselves. This was a great cooperative effort. we had 15 different federal, state, and local agencies working together on this survey. And that 1,000 hours is really just an estimate. I'm sure it's considerably more than that. But it was really mutually beneficial because we got the help, but then these other agencies had the opportunity to come and sort of see emerald ash borer up close and personal. Now, just what we use for detection for emerald ash borer in Boulder, what we've heard is it may look a little bit different here. But as Rob mentioned, we have a lot of crappy ash to begin with. But in August for us, it's really a good time to find it because the portions of ash trees that are heavily infested, we do see early fall coloration in those trees. And then the next spring, when those portions of the tree, they either don't leaf out or they're very thin, they have those little leaflets. That progresses very rapidly here to big portions of the crown dying back. And then we don't actually see the basal sprouting here. We just see a lot of sort of mid-crown sprouting in the trees just before they die. And of course, this is in addition to the D-shaped exit holes, all the bark splitting. We are starting to see woodpeckering as well in these trees, although we really haven't gotten good enough, I don't think, at using that as a detection tool here. Well, how did we develop our EAB strategy in Boulder? When it was first detected and the news release came out, the first week there were literally hundreds of emails, not just within the city of Boulder, but on the CSU sort of email PestServe group, and just diametrically opposed viewpoints. I mean, the one was just, don't use pesticides at any cost, just let all the ash trees die, they're not native anyway. But then the other one was, we've taken care of these trees, we planted these trees, we don't want to lose these, they provide great resources, services to our community, we need to protect them. So we really decided we needed to slow down this process. We didn't want to just come to some knee-jerk reaction. We wanted to really take the time to educate the community on why emerald ash borer was different, and then to solicit input back from them on how we should handle this. So we formed an internal EAB strategic team, myself, our senior environmental planner with the city, our city landscape architect, and our city IPM coordinator. And we set up this feedback loop with both the Parks and Rec Advisory Board and the Environmental Advisory Board, both of which were made up of residents in the community, and came up with a short-term strategy, and then over a 2-year period of time developed what our long-term strategy is for emerald ash borer. And we took that to City Council in a study session format last fall and received overwhelming support from Council. They were very appreciative of the slow, thoughtful process that we had taken. And they really also liked the idea that we were not going to go back to them just with an EAB management plan for them to adopt. Because some of the issues that the community brought up to us, the pesticide use on public trees, the wood utilization, what are we going to do with all this wood, was bigger than just emerald ash borer. As I mentioned, we have 350 dead standing Siberian elms right now. What are we going to do with all of that? So over the course of this year, we're going to be working actually with Davie Resource Group on an urban forest master plan for Boulder. So the strategy we developed, which we affectionately call our Ash Ops, very similar to what many other communities across the Midwest, a combination of a lot of proactive planting, treating some trees with pesticides, phasing out those other ash trees. We are using the biocontrols. And then, as I mentioned, the strategic plan over the course of the next year. Now, education outreach is really a big part of our plan. We do have our own Boulder EAB website because some of our messaging is just a little bit different than what the state has for EAB. We've done a series of open houses for the public that were very well received. We put together a door hanger that we dropped off with property owners who had symptomatic ash trees. What really worked well for us, though, and even though it was very staff intensive, though, it worked to really get a lot of grassroots support from the community for what we wanted to do. And that was going into HOAs And when we went into those HOAs, we brought maps with us of all of the public trees, and then actually went sort of almost tree by tree with them and explained, these are the ash trees that we are planning to preserve long term. These are those that we're going to phase out. These are the empty planting spaces. This is what we're proposing to do, what tree species we're going back in with. So when we did go to council, we already had the support from those HOAs. And as a response team, we also hosted a series of emerald ash borer workshops, what we affectionately called EAB dissections. And over the past 3 winters, the EAB response team has actually trained over 400 industry professionals on how to identify emerald ash borer. Now, just a quick overview of our pesticide plan for emerald ash borer. We did decide to treat about 25% of our public ash, which is going to be about 1,500 trees, about 500 trees a year on a 3-year rotation with triage. We did allow the adjacent property owners to opt out of treatment. We sent all of those adjacent property owners letters. We actually had one council member ask us if we really should be allowing them to opt out. They compared it to immunizations, that they felt that this was necessary, that we had to do this. But fortunately, you know, in 2015, we sent out over 450 letters, and we only had 10 residents who wanted to opt out of the program. But we had about another 30 who wanted to opt in to the program. We do have very strict criteria, though, for which public ash we will treat. We're not doing any ash less than 10 inches in diameter. They have to be in good health. They can't be causing any hardscape damage, not growing under power lines. And when we analyzed which trees we had evaluated, the average size came out to be about 17 inches. Now, we found it in the fall of 2013. In 2014, we only treated those public ash trees in these original 5 grids. In 2015, we went out to these grids adjacent to that. And then this June, we're going to be treating all of these other sort of outlying grids. Now, for those of you familiar with Boulder, the Pearl Street Mall, a pedestrian mall, sort of an iconic landscape. Unfortunately, 2 of the 4 blocks of the pedestrian mall are predominantly ash. And as Rob had mentioned, you know, he could have used pictures of these mall trees for his crappy ash slides earlier. These trees are already in very poor condition due to lilac ash borer, due to the ash bark beetle, just growing in a downtown urban environment. So we're not doing pesticide applications on the mall. We actually worked with a couple of our city landscape architects to develop a new plan for the mall to incorporate more diversity long term. So we're phasing out those ash trees and replacing them with a diversity of new species. I like to say that in cities, you really need to take a look at all of your programs through sort of those proverbial EAB glasses. You know, even though I think as a state, we were fairly well prepared for emerald ash borer, on a city level, I don't know if you can really truly be prepared. You know, you might think you are, but then EAB changes everything. You know, we learned pretty quickly that, you know, the scale of your entire operations changes. You know, the number of service requests we got from the public jumped from 350 one year to over 700 the next year. Suddenly you're planting twice as many trees and removing a whole lot more trees. So you really need to figure out, is it still most efficient to do some of that in-house, or you're going to have to contract that? You know, development review, we had to go back and reassess a lot of ash trees on transportation projects after we found emerald ash borer. Rotational pruning, you know, do you really want to prune a tree, an ash tree that you're planning to phase out long term? And how do you message that to the public? You know, marketing, suddenly, you know, our marketing folks wanted us to use social media, Facebook, Twitter. And I said, but I've been avoiding Twitter all these years, and now you want me to use Twitter. So, you know, it's just, it changes really everything. And what the impact is for the city of Boulder, I'm not going to go through these numbers because I'm sure these are very similar to what a lot of cities across the Midwest, you know, has seen. But The funding mechanism that we decided to use in Boulder, Forestry sits underneath Parks and Recreation. So Parks and Rec decided to fund us for Emerald Ash Borer using CIP or capital money. And so for the first several years, we received an additional $220,000 a year, which will balloon up to $500,000 a year as EAB populations ramp up and we start losing a lot more trees. We also did receive one additional staff person, although that was really a repurposed FTE from our horticulture program. So that just goes to show that, you know, EAB impacts more than just forestry work groups within a city.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit now about Denver's EAB story and just kind of the work that we've done to try to get our community ready. I really just like that slide. That's kind of how I feel sometimes when it comes to talking about EAB. So where does it start here? All of our highest ranking positions in the city, whenever our mayor changes, all those people have to resign. And so you get this brand new crop of appointed executive directors. And that's a picture of me and Scott Gilmore. I drug him out to Sacramento and I made him hug big trees and tried to get him to understand. But the point is, how do you get all of these people to understand what EAB is and what the problem, you know, how to really wrap their minds around this and get their attention. One of the big things that we did was we took advantage of the 2013 canopy assessment and we used these numbers to try to explain that it's more than just cutting a tree down and putting a new tree in. You know, property value being one of the biggest losses, and using shots like the picture below and asking people, where would you rather live? Where would you rather pay a little bit more to live? And just getting people to understand that there's so much more to this than just tree dying, tree needing to be cut down. So what did we do? 2014, 2015, we got people's attention in Denver and made it very clear that this was more than a forestry issue. It was a citywide issue. So we put together this very broad EAB steering committee that was comprised of municipal, state, federal, our community planning and development department, public works, budget management, environmental health, mayor's office, etc. Just got a whole big group of people, different stakeholders. And we told them the EAB story, and we said, these are things other communities have done, and we tried to build some consensus on them providing us direction as to what forestry should do. The steering committee came up with these 6 key points that were kind of our guiding principles as we were moving forward. Basically, public education had to be key. Pesticide treatments had to be part of our program on qualified trees, not a treat all the ash trees type of pesticide treatment campaign. That the city needed to look at treating right-of-way trees to slow mortality for a finite period of time. Public right-of-way trees would need to be, sorry, I've got, hope that works. I'm sorry, public right-of-way trees need to be replaced by the city, and the city should engage in the replanting of private property trees. I'm sorry, encourage the replanting of private property trees. And that we needed to come up with a plan to divert wood waste from our landfills. So after we finished with the steering committee, I threw out this idea to our leadership of let's take a group of people that aren't forestry people and let's go to the Midwest and let's learn from some of these cities. So myself, we had marketing, we had budget management, we had Office of Sustainability, Mayor's Office, and a brand new city council member who I knew had a degree in natural resource management. And we piled all of us on a plane and we drove around the Midwest in a car, and we visited Chicago, let these people see, let everybody see the how Chicago did their, was managing their program. That city was much deeper into emerald ash borer. Let our attendees see what it was like to drive around the city and see how dramatically emerald ash borer was impacting trees. Shot of our council member there getting some hands-on experience with basically the destruction of EAB, able to see these streets where the Bureau of Forestry in Chicago was treating the right-of-way trees, and then the adjacent trees, not on a treatment program, and how clearly treatments do work, and the results of what happens when you don't treat. Chicago, they do a good job of marking trees. So you can actually just walk on streets and see when trees were treated in '09 or in 2013. And the city's literally treated tens of thousands of street trees there. And just was a really interesting experience in Chicago. We moved from Chicago up to Milwaukee, drove up there. They have had emerald ash borer a little bit shorter time than Chicago did. Got a good shot there of the woodpeckering activity and the alligator bark that they termed it there. And I think the most interesting thing we learned in Milwaukee is City Forester David there, he's got this great pool of information showing slides from the late 50s of American elms on streets, and then the devastation of Dutch elm disease as it progressed into the 60s, and that canopy difference. And then the reality is 50 years later, they haven't recovered. And I think the time investment of our ash trees is often overlooked. And what are 50 years worth? And Milwaukee's really pushing that as part of the reason why they're protecting their trees is that it takes decades to recover from losing big old trees. And they also showed us some of their ash woodlots, and it just getting that hands-on piece really was eye-opening for all of our attendees to see this stuff firsthand and try to wrap their minds around what is Denver, what is the metro area going to do as EAB begins to blow up in our communities here. Last place we visited was Madison. Madison was infested with EAB really similar time to Boulder, around 2013. This is a shot, a big windrow of ash that we visited first. And this is a street view from 2011 from Google. I didn't unfortunately have a more recent one, but you can see pretty quickly EAB is just taking over this stand of trees. If you were to do a 180 from where we're standing there and look across the street, you would see this community, this neighborhood where lots of ash trees were on the streets. It's another street view, nice, beautiful neighborhood. And I like to do this transition slide of, okay, what does that neighborhood feel like to you now? And what does it feel like to you there? You can see the dead ash in the backyard, but you feel that social dynamic type of change there, property values, just the feel of the neighborhood. And again, what we learned a lot from Madison and the way they're managing the program. The reality was all of these cities that we talked to in the Midwest, the one key message, everybody did stuff a little bit different, but the reality was they all said, get a plan, put your plan together, and don't wait. Don't wait for it to move from Boulder to Denver. Start now, be proactive, or it will get ahead of you, too quickly. So back to Colorado. I just wanted to throw that slide in for fun, just to remind everybody. Okay, so what we did is we developed this 10-year budget plan for Denver, and it basically was really challenging to do that, especially when we were still working on numbers of trees, inventory information. But the reality was when we laid it out, it was about a $30 million 10-year plan, which is this is still work in progress. Every year it changes a little bit. But the reality that is a real challenge for Denver is back in the 1900s, our mayor here, Mayor Spear, was a big leader behind getting these trees planted in our rights of way. But one of the things that was done was the city said everybody's going to help plant trees and everybody's going to have the duty to maintain them. So Denver is a city that for the last 100 years or more actually now, that all of our street trees, the duty to maintain them are the adjacent landowners. So it's a real unique problem for us when we also have parts of the code that say it's our job to make sure we deal with trees that endanger the public right of way, and that we at once get rid of trees that are infested with communicable diseases that can impact the good health of other trees. So the code is driving a lot of our plan as well. We started our inventory right of way when Boulder found EAB in 2013. We finished all of our park trees. We're about 75% through our street trees. As our crews are doing the street trees, they're also capturing data of ash on private property to help us with education long-term, so we'll know where the parcels are that have ash on private property as well. And it also really gave us this great feel of what our current maintenance needs are. The reality is we've got a lot of work now that we could be doing to be ready for emerald ash borer when it does show up. And an inventory is the best way to tell that story. Great data is what leads to getting budget increases. So I'm going to talk about what Denver's doing, and I'm going to talk about it in these three buckets of trees in essence. So the biggest category are our trees on private property. We estimate about 290,000 ash within private properties around Denver. And the reality of the steering committee was the best way we can deal with this, was trying to educate property owners. It looks like we're going to have about 36,000 parcels that have private ash trees on them. For the city to try to directly manage this, the costs were just so high. We felt like we couldn't do that sort of thing. And the reality is we were going to try to come up with ways to encourage planting. And as far as dead and dangerous trees, that was going to be done through code enforcement as we normally do to make sure trees are safe and infestations are kept in check. If you take our inventory and you turn on show me ash on private property, that's what it looks like. All those yellow triangles are places where parcels showed up with ash on private property. Great way to get council members' attention, great way to get support saying this will impact constituents within your district. Second bucket is our trees that we publicly maintain. These are trees in Denver that are within parks, designated parkways, public office buildings. We have 76,000 trees within those properties, and 6,000 of those were ash. I do like to point out that in 2003, Denver stopped permitting ash from being planted in rights of way and on parks when we saw the blow up of EAB in Michigan. So that I think that really helped keep our numbers down in parks. We're kind of going with the whole SLAM type of program, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. We're removing ash that are small or poor condition, trying to get those replaced as quickly as possible, filling new spots, planting new trees. We're going to start treatments next year within our park system. We continue to survey and monitor, doing the Canadian Forest Service branch peeling method, wood utilization, trap trees, all of that sort of big picture stuff in our parks. The most difficult for us to decide what to do with of the buckets was our privately maintained public right-of-way trees. So all of these trees that are in the right-of-way, they're owned by the city, they're managed, you have to have a permit to remove them, but the duty being the adjacent landowners to maintain them. With 75% of our inventory complete, it looks like we're going to trend towards about 209,000 street trees, about 26,000 ash within our public rights-of-way. We worked with our budget management office, a gal that we took to the Midwest with us who's just incredibly smart, and she took a 1993 street tree inventory that Denver had done, and she modeled and projected numbers. This graph shows that death curve of how many dead ash trees we would have in the over a 12-year period of an EAB infestation. The reality being these years 8, 9, 10, those numbers of trees would be far beyond what we could manage with code enforcement, lead to dead trees on streets, over bus stops and schools, and it would become a public safety issue that we felt allowing this to remain within the hands of the adjacent landowner was not going to be a good thing. And she also modeled these numbers if we were to do trunk injections, as we learned from the Midwest communities, and the numbers we can just see are much more manageable, something we might actually be able to do. So the decision after all of that was the city, for the first time in 100 years, is going to actually engage in managing the ash trees in the right-of-way. Our code is written in such a way that it says, while the duty is the adjacent landowner, the city forester may do maintenance on these trees. We've laid this out in this plan to do, we're basically targeting ash that are 12 inches and larger, fair condition or better, and we're going to use a systematic way of a grid pattern across the entire city, and we're going to treat trees on a 3-year rotation, and then we plan to kind of tier that up. So this, maybe in the first 3 years, we're doing all 12-inch and larger. Years 4, 5, and 6, we're going to do possibly trees 18 inches and larger, and then in the end, we would shift up again with the idea that eventually the city will pull out and turn the maintenance back over. But we're going to try to control the number of dead trees on the streets and educate as we go, communicate with those property owners, and try to just manage this the best we can. So 2016 is really our first big year that we're kicking off for kind of getting public with our EAB program, and the big pieces are education, proactive treatments, and proactive planting. So our education campaign, we've gotten a good budget increase. We've hired a marketing company, and we've been working with them very closely. This isn't actually official yet, so I guess everybody keep it a little quiet if you can. But they've They like this this slogan, "Be a smart ash." You can see a couple logos. We're still trying to debate which one's the best here, but you see the "Be Smart" standing out, and that's kind of the key. Is, you know, we want people to know they have an ash tree, and we want them to know what their options are. That beasmartash.com. We've got that. We've got those sites under our control now, but they're not open yet. But if you guys are interested, here in May is our big kickoff, and if you want to go to beasmartash.com and see what we're doing, in a couple months you'll be able to do that. Planting. A lot of our budget people, when I was saying we got to start planting now, they didn't really understand how do you plant when the trees haven't even started dying yet. We're going to try to replace all of our ash trees in the right-of-way over a 10-year period, and we're going to start now, and we're going to plant vacant sites for future replacements of trees that will die someday. We've gotten a big budget increase for that as well. We're partnering with our nonprofit partner, and they're going to be the key here is when we plant a tree here, we need to find somebody to take care of it. When we plant trees in Colorado, if somebody's not going to water it and take care of it, the trees won't live. So it's a bigger challenge for us to find. We got to find people that want trees, want to take care of their city tree, and help us do that. And so that program's underway. It's basically going to be a goal of about 4,000 new right-of-way trees planted every year, and we need people to engage. In our parks, we're going to increase around 200 to 300 trees to basically start replacing those trees that we're not going to protect through treatments. Also over a period of time, doing that in-house and with volunteers. And so I guess the reality here is I want to thank our mayor, Denver Mayor Michael Hancock. Just his staff and himself, just very open, understands people in Denver care a lot about their trees. He's supported this entire public tree inventory through budget increases. All of our staff are walking around with iPads, and we're using cloud-based technology so that our staff can update things in the field. Since all this started, we've brought on 10 new forestry staff members, and the reality of our 2016 budget expansion is we were able to secure $2.9 million expansion, which is like an 80% budget increase for us. And it's a little bit short of $1 million for proactive planning, a little bit short of $1 million for treatment around the city, and a $250,000 education line item there to work with that marketing campaign. So that's just a real quick run through of Denver, and I'm a little bit over on my time. But there's our contact information, and had a great staff member named Bill Castle that was great at making little pictures like this. And I think that I don't always look for invasive pests, but when I do, I look in Boulder. It's just so perfect for Kathleen and her people, because that just seems to be the way it goes. So thank you all for listening, and I think that's all we've got for today.
Well, thank you so much, Kathleen and Rob. I've had a chuckle every once in a while on some of your PowerPoint slides, because I can relate to a lot of what you're saying, especially about the invasive pests and how much more do I really want to talk about emerald ash borer. This has been great information. We get a lot of inquiries about, how do you start management plans? How can I, find these? And that kind of thing, and where the best, where can we start? And I was wondering, I know you all kind of did an overview of what you did and how you started, but now looking at it, what for you were you're probably like, if let's say there's somebody thinking about developing a plan, a forester that's watching this, a municipal forester, city arborist, what would be the best way to start? Would you have any kind of best resources that you would name first, now that you've been through this?
Kathleen and I are kind of looking at each other as to who to answer to that, but it's for me in Denver, it's about getting people to understand. And there's just so much out there to show. And I think people believe in pictures, and they believe in real world stories. One of the things we've done is we've tracked media, and we've tracked the stories and papers. And you hit these people, you hit budget people, and you hit leadership with, here's a story about Montana, and they're hiring new forestry staff, and EAB isn't even in a neighboring state, but they've recognized how important it is. Or Nebraska and Lincoln, where they're trying to pass a big bond, and again, proactive, trying to let the leadership see what the potential impact is to constituents, how widespread it's going to hit a city, and and just letting them understand that if they're elected type of people, you know, you can look two ways with EAB. You can look like you should have known better, because there's lots and lots of years of examples of what it does to cities, or you can look good by being proactive and trying to do stuff to be prepared. I think, do you have anything to add?
Well, I mean, I think for us too, the other big one was just, fortunately, we weren't the first for emerald ash borer. I mean, so many cities, you know, in the Midwest and, you know, had to deal with it before us, and they were just so open and willing to share their experiences and the plans that they had developed, that we were able to use those as templates. So, I mean, I know Rob and I are both open and willing, you know, to, especially for cities out here in the West that are dealing with situations similar to ours, you know, where ash isn't native and they might have 40, 50, you know, % ash. You know, we're happy to talk to them too about our experiences.
Appreciate that answer. Cliff Sadoff is asking, can you explain why Denver has a 50-50 split for planting and treating trees?
So I don't know if you should look at it that way. What we did was, the way we budgeted was we tried to estimate basically how many ash would be over that size class of 12 inches and larger, fair condition or better, and that was, our inventory is done in 6-inch size classes. So we've got 0 to 6, 6 to 12, 12 to, and that's the way it was done. So that just was kind of an easy, natural way to start. And that was basically an estimate of trying to treat that population over a 3-year period. So it wasn't, and then the planting, we tried to estimate total number of ash, and then what would it take to replace all those ash over 10 years if we did it 1 year at a time. And that's just what the number came out. So it may look like a 50-50 split, but the reality is it's just about what it costs to do both of those things, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much. Donna is asking, she says, you may have covered this in the beginning. I didn't catch the whole webinar, so I apologize if you've already answered this. Do you have city employees treating the trees, or are you hiring it professionally? How much are you paying to treat each tree? The EAB is not here yet, but I am preparing to treat for it as a professional, but I don't know what to charge per inch when doing a large number of trees in parks, etc.
We contract in Boulder all of our pesticide applications. And when EAB was first found, you know, we asked quite a few of the arborists, the tree care companies, what they would charge just to help us with budgeting. And the prices they threw out were, you know, $8, $9, $10 per diameter inch for the triage. But when we actually put together the contracts and sent them out to bid in 2014, I want to say we paid, it was about $7.25 per diameter inch. But then in 2015, we had a lot more trees that we were contracting that year. And one of the contracts was $6.25 per inch, and then the other one was about $5.75 per diameter inch. So the prices definitely went down with, you know, the more trees that we had.
I want to add a couple things. One of the interesting things we learned in that Midwest trip, if you want to, you know, talk to these folks, Marla, Eddie, in Madison, and I hope I don't say his last name wrong, but David Sevier in Milwaukee, they're both working. They're bringing on, and I believe the term is an intern type position, and I think they had their cost per inch down close to like $3.75 an inch for treatment, doing it in-house like that. So that's the cheapest I've ever seen it done. In Denver, we are doing a combo. Our street trees are all going to be done with a contractor. We actually, one of my staff members is in a pre-bid meeting right now. We put out our contract for the bid to be per milliliter injected, and that's just because the reality is bigger trees, it's an exponential increase of how much you have to do it. And so we'll see how that comes out soon. We'll have an official bid for ours. And then our parks, we're doing in-house, doing a combination of injections and doing bark banding sprays as well. And that's, you know, we'll be able to track those costs once we get going there as well. So we're doing a combination. All
right, thank you. We have one of one of the participants is wondering if it's possible to get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to leave that up to you two if you want to share it. I will say that this recorded webinar will be available on the emeraldashborer.info site, and you can use that actually as a presentation if you wanted to use that, wanted to do that. So that's just one option here.
And I think if anybody's interested in getting an actual copy of it, I think you just need to email one of us.
Yeah.
We could get you a copy of it.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I want to make sure I've got all the questions here. All right, Dennis, thanks you for your answer. I'm not seeing any other questions at this time, but I would like to thank Rob and Kathleen for this great information. I really learned a lot, especially about ash in Colorado. I had no idea it was such a, more as much as a desert as it was, but that's great to know. And I think what you guys have done is just amazing as far as management. It's great that you had so much cooperation also from your city leaders and all your team that you've been working with. So that's a great plus for all of that. Like I say, this is being recorded. It will be available on the emeraldashborer.info site. Thanks again, Kathleen and Rob. And if anyone has questions, I will provide their email addresses in the email that I'm going to be sending out after this is over. And I encourage you to contact them if you have any questions. So with that, thanks again. I'm going to be closing down the meeting here in just a couple of seconds. And everyone have a good day. And thanks for getting up early today and helping us with this webinar, Rob and Kathleen.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.